1 second, I just have to flip my view. Okay, great. Well, thanks again. My name is Caitlin Gannon from the Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, so sometimes we like to say JC NERR or Jacques Cousteau Reserve for short. We're located in Tuckerton, at least our offices and educational space is in Tuckerton, but I'll explain the whole reserve during this presentation and what we do at the reserve, as well as all of the critters and ecosystem services that the estuary provides us down here in southeast New Jersey. So if you haven't heard of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, here's a map of all of the reserves across the country, or all of the NERRs, we will say as well. There's about 30 National Estuarine Research Reserves throughout the United States. We all receive NOAA operational funds, and it's all divvied amongst us. And then we're managed by a state entity. So at the Jacques Cousteau Reserve, we're managed by Rutgers University. So it's a really neat state-federal partnership that make up the reserve system. And as you can see, we have reserves all up and down the eastern seaboard, in the Gulf Coast, West Coast, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and also within the Great Lakes. And your list of reserves are all on the side there. All have their own unique names as well, depending on the geographical location. They're usually named after the river or area that they're in. I'll explain why we're called the Jacques Cousteau Reserve in a little bit. But we're a real great system. Everyone's a little unique, but we're all similar as well. So it's kind of a neat program to be a part of. What we do at the JC NERR, our mission is to improve the management of New Jersey coastal environments and the national natural resources that we have through science, education, and stewardship. Each reserve, for the most part, has 4 main sectors within the reserve. And then we have other staff and volunteers as well. But our 4 main sectors is the coastal training program, which is, we have a coastal training program coordinator. Her name is Vanessa. And Vanessa will work with different towns and municipalities, decision-making folks within those areas, like mayors, city planners, and other stakeholders, and work with them to educate them about the different coastal hazards that might be present within that area, that coastal town. So for example, flooding is a hazard that's happening throughout New Jersey, and how to prepare for those hazards, how to maybe plan for future hazards, such as continued rising seas, and especially also storms, now that we are just about in hurricane season. You know, those are topics that are being talked about and planned about. So that is the Coastal Training Program Coordinator. Research and monitoring of our estuary. We do many research projects and monitoring efforts. We want to always keep tabs, of course, on the health of the estuary, and we do that through monitoring our water quality, nutrient quality, and also our weather as well. Our stewardship coordinator does a lot on habitat and habitat mapping. And then we have education, who, and that's my role at the JC NERR. We do a lot of educational programming for a variety of audiences, such as teachers, community members, students, and we have all different sorts of programs catered to those particular audiences. We had to do many virtual programs like what we're doing today, of course, during COVID-19. And throughout the staff, we also have a communications coordinator, volunteer coordinator, and you can see us there. We had a cleanup day on our trail this last summer while we were, right in the middle of COVID-19 there. So we, have been doing all of our programming and, staff meetings and everything all remotely, but that one day we got together for a trail cleanup. This is our coastal building, our coastal education building, I should say. And that's located in Tuckerton, where we have office space, dorm space, and educational space, where we have most of our programs. Of course, right now, that building is closed to the public. But behind that building, we have a trail that's about half a mile long, and it takes you through the upland forests down to a salt marsh area. It's really, really nice. It's at 130 Great Bay Boulevard. That's the address of the building. And as soon as you pull into the parking lot, you'll see the entrance of the trail right on the right-hand side. If you are interested in coming to explore the trail, again, our building is unfortunately closed, but feel free to go out and explore our trail, which is called the Grassley Marsh Trail. We also have an education exhibit at the reserve as well. However, we don't have a large enough educational space to have an area where we can do workshops and have an exhibit. So we have our actual interactive exhibit at the Tuckerton Seaport, which is right down the road from us. They're really great friends of ours and great partners. So if you go to the main building of the Tuckerton Seaport and you go on their first floor, you'll see our educational interactive exhibit space. Fortunately, though, right now that is also closed due to COVID-19, but hopefully we can open that up soon. And also right down the road from us is the Rutgers Marine Field Station. Much of our research staff use this facility along with the Marine Field Station staff to do our research and monitoring efforts. It's all the way down at the end of Great Bay Boulevard. If you've ever driven down Great Bay Boulevard, also known as Seven Bridges Road, it's a beautiful drive. Just keep going all the way down. You'll see fantastic, beautiful marsh habitat and parts of the bay as well. And at the very, very end is the Rutgers Marine Field Station, which is always closed to the public because research efforts are ongoing there all the time. But one day a year, they do open it for the Rutgers Marine Field Station open house event, and you can get to go in and see what kind of research efforts are happening there, which is really, really neat that they do that, and we help them out with that event too. So hopefully we'll be able to do another open house event soon. So why are we called the Jacques Cousteau Reserve? We are the only National Estuarine Research Reserve to be named after a person. We were designated in 1997, and a congressman at the time, New Jersey Congressman Saxton, wanted to dedicate the reserve to Jacques Cousteau because that was the same year that he had passed away. So that's why we are named the Jacques Cousteau Reserve. During the dedication, members of Jacques Cousteau's family attended, which was really neat. And that's where we get the name from. So if you've heard of an estuary before, but not quite sure what it might be, here's where we'll sort of distinguish that right now. So think about what an estuary is, or what you think it might be. Take your best guess. I'll give you a second or two. Here's some clues in the pictures down below. Those are photos of estuaries. In a real quick explanation, it's where the rivers meet the sea. So we have rivers that are meeting the ocean, salty ocean water, and that's where they meet and mix. There's a lot of mixing going on, a lot of water flow happening within estuaries, a lot of nutrient mix as well. But if you remember from when we first started this presentation, I talked about the Great Lakes. So there are freshwater estuaries as well. So you might be thinking, well, how is that possible? Since, you know, estuaries are areas where freshwater rivers meet salty ocean water. But I would say a more complete definition maybe of an estuary, or a better definition of an estuary, is where two different types of, or two different bodies of water with different chemical and physical characteristics will meet and mix. So a river meeting a lake is also considered an estuary, especially if it's a very large lake, like the Great Lakes that we have in the US. So here we are at the Jacques Cousteau Reserve, and our estuary is where the Mullica River meets the Atlantic Ocean in the Great Bay area. So we're the Great Bay Mullica River estuary. If you can see my mouse, here's the Mullica River winding down past Mystic Island, the large Great Bay here. This is the Tuckerton Peninsula. Seven Bridges Road that I mentioned earlier is on this peninsula, and this peninsula serves as our sentinel site where we do much of our monitoring of salt marsh wetlands. And then in Tuckerton, where we have our office spaces up here. But all of this red right here is the Jacques Cousteau Reserve boundaries. And the Jacques Cousteau Reserve is quite large, and we encompass two watersheds, the Mullica River watershed and the Great Bay watershed. So we talked about estuaries. Now I mentioned a watershed. And so what exactly is a watershed? Well, it is different from an estuary. A watershed is an area of land that acts like a big basin, or a kind of like a bowl almost. And if we had precipitation in the form of rain, for example, where does all of that water flow down into? And the direction of that water flow, or that runoff, distinguishes one watershed from its neighboring watershed. So right here we have a diagram of what that would look like, water flowing down into a specific watershed, into other waterways, and making its way down into larger bodies of water. And also some of that water is absorbed or goes down into groundwater, which I'll talk about in a little bit too. So it has to do with the topography of the land, or the layout of the land, and where water flows in relation to that. So we have our estuary, and we have our large Mullica River watershed. So that's so most of the Jacques Cousteau Reserve is in or within this watershed. A smaller portion of the northern end of the Jacques Cousteau Reserve is in the Great Bay watershed, or I'm sorry, the Barnegat Bay watershed. So we're just gonna focus on this one for right now. Much of this watershed has Pine Barrens habitats and ecosystems within it. And it just gives you also a great idea of all the other streams and rivers that flow into the Mullica River that then make its way into Great Bay. I have two stars here on the Mullica River. And then I have a question for you, just to kind of ponder for a second. How far upriver do you think is the upper limit of saltwater inundation? So right here, you know, where we have our bay, we're mixing salty ocean water with that river water. But how far upriver do you think the salty ocean water goes? You know, we have different gradients of salinity. The farther upriver you go, the less and less salty it gets, of course. But how far upriver do you think it goes? Does it stop at the Black Star or stop at the Red Star? The Red Star is the area of Wharton State Forest that's known as Batstow or Batstow Village area, to give you some reference. So actually both stars are correct in a way, sort of a trick question. Most of the time, it's going to be the Black Star, which is an area called Lower Bank. But if we have a storm event like we did in 2012 with Superstorm Sandy, and we had storm surge, all of that ocean water got pushed upriver, and it went as far as the Red Star, which is pretty amazing to think about. You know, that's pretty much all freshwater most of the time. And you think about all the critters that are used to, you know, those water conditions, and then all of a sudden you got salty ocean water coming in. How does that affect the critters and the habitat around it? All right, so here are the JC NERR boundaries that I was talking about before. So we're actually sort of a patchwork of state and federal lands. Edwin B. Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge is part of the JC NERR, part of Wharton State Forest. So these are all of our land management partners that make up the Jacques Cousteau Reserve. So that's why, you know, that's how we can kind of cover that area that you saw in red before when we looked at that other map. In each one of these areas around the estuary, there are different ecosystems, and we're going to go through those ecosystems here today. I just wanted to, though, acknowledge if there are any questions that come up, just let me know, but otherwise we'll move on. So if you want to kind of imagine us starting all the way upriver and canoeing down to the ocean throughout the estuary, that's how we're going to go through each habitat. So we're going to start in the Pine Barrens, about 1.1 million acres in New Jersey. So the Pine Barrens are really, really amazing, unique habitat that we have in our state. The Mullica River, Great Bay watershed, most of it is within the Pine Barrens or Pinelands Management Area, which is really, really neat. And the runoff within the estuary, when we do have precipitation events, it goes through the Pine Barrens and actually gets filtered. The Pine Barrens sort of act like a filtration or drainage system for when we have rain or other forms of precipitation like snow. And as it runs through the watershed, the Pine Barrens, in a way, clean the water as it runs through. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But I just love this map of the eastern seaboard. This is the East Coast. You can see New Jersey and then Delaware and all of the light sources from each of these major cities that we have on the East Coast. And right in the center of New Jersey is this large black spot, and that's the Pine Barrens. So it's pretty amazing. So the Pine Barrens are largely undeveloped. And so when we do have precipitation, instead of going and running through parking lots or neighborhoods and picking up sources of non-point source pollution, like different kinds of litter or oil or sediment, which can contaminate our waterways, it gets filtered through the Pine Barrens. So it either will go down and recharge the water table and be stored as groundwater. We have multiple aquifers in New Jersey. Maybe the most well-known one is the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer, which are utilized as water as a water resource in New Jersey. And you can see in this map here, the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer is the peach kind of color, and then the red outlines the Pine Barrens. And so along with being absorbed underground, a lot of the precipitation will also just get naturally filled as it runs down through the watershed by plants and a process called transpiration. So when this water flows down, this runoff water flows down into rivers and lakes and streams and eventually Great Bay, a lot of it gets absorbed by plant life and slows the flow of water as well, essentially cleaning it as it makes its way to other larger waterways. The Pine Barrens are, like I've said before, really, really unique kind of habitat. Not many species of trees are able to grow in this really sandy habitat. The soil is not very nutrient rich because it's so sandy. So we have mostly pines and oaks that do pretty well within the Pine Barrens. So you think that not too many critters would call it home, but there are many species of animals that you would find within the Pine Barrens and in the freshwater wetlands of the Pine Barrens as well. One of them is the Pine Barrens tree frog, which is the top right corner here. There's also a very specific species of plant that grows within the Pine Barrens. That's known as an endemic species, where it's only found in a particular habitat only. And that's this type of grass right here. It's the Kinnikerns beaked rush, or Kinniskerns beaked rush. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly the first time. And then various species of birds and mammals will also call this place home as well. The water here in the Pine Barrens is also very acidic, and that comes from the roots and fallen pine needles of the trees within the Pine Barrens. They contain a chemical component called tannins, and tannins are acidic, and they also make the water that very tea kind of color. So the water from above might look, quote unquote dirty, but really it's the tannins in the water, as well as some natural deposits of iron as well. All right, so you can imagine we're continuing our canoe trip farther and farther down the Mullica River and closer to coastal habitats. After a while, the trees will start to change a little bit. You might get to the upland forest edge, something like this along the top. And then you will slowly make your way to more open marsh area, like these coastal wetlands here. Coastal wetlands or salt marsh wetlands are all up and down the eastern seaboard of New Jersey. And we have this really flowy grass-like vegetation here. And then as you go closer to the forest edge, you'll get some what's known as phragmites, these reeds, tall reeds here. We do have native and non-native species of phragmites in our state. Other native plants that are sort of more bushy, kind of at that forest marsh edge, is also known as marsh elder, which grows, I think this looks like some marsh elder over here. So it's kind of a transition from one habitat to another. You have your forest going into your lower marsh, and you have those transition of vegetation species as you go from forest to marsh too. So coastal wetlands also have many ecosystem services as well. Just like the Pine Barrens, they will filter water flow and runoff water as well. But also marshes are really great at nutrient recycling. So any dead, decaying plant matter will be decomposed, and the nutrients from that dead, decaying plant matter will be reused for the next season. So as far as nutrient recycling and productivity, coastal salt marshes are the #1 ecosystem for doing that. They're very effective at doing that. They also store a ton of carbon. They uptake a lot of carbon from the atmosphere and store carbon, which is really, really important, especially with the increase of carbon dioxide in our atmospheres, currently. Another habitat that's similar to coastal wetlands that's very good at doing this are mangroves, which you would find down south. But wetlands are also a great nursery for many species of animals, especially species that we like to eat. Different kinds of fish and shellfish will start their lives within a coastal wetland habitat. There's a ton of nutrients, little safe places to hide if you're a baby fish or a crab. Scientists were often refer to coastal wetlands as nurseries for them. And coastal wetlands is where you'll have your mix of that salt water and that fresh water if you're a coastal estuary. And we call this mix of salt and fresh water brackish water. And here are some brackish water specialists. We have our diamondback terrapin. It's probably the beginning of diamondback terrapin season right now. The females are starting to emerge and lay their eggs and build their nests. So especially around Memorial Day weekend is when you really start to see them emerge. So if you're driving out to the coast, for a day at the beach, always keep an eye out for diamondback terrapins if you're crossing salt marsh wetlands. They are a species of turtle. I often get asked what the difference is between a turtle and a terrapin. And a terrapin is a turtle species that only lives in brackish water. So that's why they get the special name terrapin. And also different, small forage fish. You have mummy chugs right here, or, different kinds of killifish that swim in large schools. These guys are preyed on quite often by different, aquatic species or different birds. They're always swimming in large schools for protection. Some flatfish here. This is called a hog choker. It looks much like a flounder, but a little bit different from a flounder. And then here's another interesting fish called a sickleback that has these tiny little spines here. Now, another species that's really, really interesting, to me at least, especially, and I think captures interest from a lot of people, are American eels. So here are some eels right here. And eels are really, really amazing in that they go from freshwater to saltwater, back to freshwater. This is known as a catadromous fish. So they spend their adult life in freshwater, and then they will spawn in, they make their way out to the Atlantic Ocean and then spawn in salty ocean water. And then when the babies hatch out in the Atlantic Ocean, the cycle continues again. They go back through the estuary, back to freshwater areas where they spend their lives. And then when it's their turn to breed, they will do the exact same thing. So really, really interesting, sort of the opposite of salmon. Salmon and species like it are known as anadromous, where they spend their adult life in seawater and then they go to freshwater to spawn. So it's the opposite of salmon. And this fish, eels, have a high commercial value. So some studies are being done within the area along the East Coast and to fur management purposes of the American eel. And so we continue to make our way to more open water in the bay and the ocean. This is a photo of the estuary from a helicopter, at least part of the estuary from a helicopter, and where the Mullica River is meeting Great Bay. It's a really neat photo. This is the Garden State Parkway, one of the bridges that's crossing the water and marshland. So once you're in Great Bay, you might see some larger predatory fish like flounder, black drum. You might see some crabs, or you'll see crabs kind of in the coastal wetlands as well. Striped bass fishing is very popular. And herring and alewife are another fish that are like eels that follow the same pattern as eels. So they'll go through the estuary as well. Now, the Rutgers Marine Field Station have been doing this really neat fish study for almost 30 years, or actually probably over 30 years. It's an ichthyoplankton study. Ichthyoplankton are essentially baby fish or larval fish, and they're caught in a very large net. It looks like a large stocking. It's thrown over this bridge. It's towed for about 30 minutes from the current and captures lots of fish larvae, which are then analyzed at the Rutgers Marine Field Station. And they've been keeping track of larval fish for those 30 years to see differences in species and collect other information. If you're curious about this flounder, he's got like a little battery pack on his back. That's actually a tracking device. Our research coordinator was doing fish tracking studies on flounder a little while ago, and he would set up remote sensors that were placed throughout the bay, and fish with this little tracking device, if they got close enough to that sensor, it would track it and keep that data. It's kind of like Easy Pass. If you use it, you go under the sensor and it records that you've been there. It's sort of the same thing. It's like Easy Pass for fish, and we can track movements of fish that way and make that data available for fisheries managers. And as we get closer and closer to the ocean, we're going to get to our barrier islands now. Here is the Rutgers Marine Field Station way out on Great Bay Boulevard by the inlet. And this is an old fish processing plant, or what's known as a fish factory. It's abandoned, but it used to be a menhaden processing plant. Menhaden is a schooling fish that's found off the Atlantic coast. It's very popular commercially. Actually, I'll talk about that in just a second. So our barrier islands, we know them as, the beach, going to the beach and having a nice beach day. New Jersey has many, many barrier islands along the coast. But because they're made out of sand, they're always shifting and changing. Dunes themselves shift and change. Here is sort of a diagram of the different kinds of dunes that you might find if you go to Barnegat Light, actually, and you're exploring Barnegat Light where the lighthouse is. Excuse me, you'll see some fantastic dune formations of very old dunes and then very new dunes that have formed not that long ago. So the old dunes will have plant life growth like your maritime forests, and then as you get closer to the ocean, those are your newer dunes. So they always are shifting and changing and moving back due to the ocean and the immense amount of energy the ocean has on the barrier island and the dune system, and also the flow of water and the currents are always shifting and moving these dunes around. I have a really neat Google time lapse I wanted to share, so just one second. I'm actually gonna do a new share, and let's see, here it is. Right, so I think you should be able to see that. If you see a map, if there is no map, Naja, just tell me and I'll change my screen. But this is a really neat tool called Google Earth Engine or Google Earth Time Lapse. And I'm going to zoom in on our estuary right here and the peninsula. This is Long Beach Island for reference. And then down here is, Barnegat and Atlantic City. So we have the inlet right here, and the very lower end of Long Beach Island has changed dramatically since 1984 due to currents and sand shifting and moving. So I'm going to play that since 1984. I'll let it go right now. Just watch the very end here. All right, so pretty cool. I'll do it one more time. And so you can see the island sort of growing at the bottom here, which is pretty neat. There's no development at the very lower end of LBI. So this is a natural process that barrier islands do. Over time, they shift and move. You can see the rest of LBI up here is very developed with homes and other types of development and human activity going on here. And so this is staying relatively put, but the rest of the island is shifting, and not only growing down this way, but it's also shifting backwards that way. You can actually see there's a ton of sand in 2020. And I believe probably after, Sandy, here's 2012. Between 2012 and 2013, there's a ton of sand that gets deposited in the back. I can't say for certain that's due to Sandy, but it's very likely. And you can see it kind of shifting backwards because we have this big dip right here. So this part of the island is moving backwards, the rest of the island staying put because we have a ton of development at the upper part. So really interesting to see how the environment will shift and move, especially our barrier islands. Okay, so I'm going to go back to screen one. One of our staff members at the JC NERR, Dr. Norb Sudi, is an expert in this subject. He is a coastal geomorphologist. So he studies dune movement, sediment movement relative to what's going on with the ocean and what's going on with the coast, especially areas that we live in. And here are the critters that you'd find along the beach, different kinds of marine mammals, horseshoe crabs. It's also their nesting season as well. Different various shorebirds. You probably will see signs to stay off certain areas of the dunes because of shorebird nesting. So they can nest on the beach while we can also enjoy the surf. Different kinds of shellfish, and then this is menhaden, the fish that I mentioned before, that have a very high commercial value. They're a filter feeder fish, so they actually prey on tiny microorganisms like plankton, and because of that, they're very, very oily. So we actually use menhaden oil in many products. So we don't eat menhaden. We just use them and their oil for things like cosmetics or even kinds of dog food, different types of fish oil, supplements, things like that. So as you can see throughout the estuary, we have a ton of biodiversity. We have a very complex food web from all the way down at the bottom of our plankton and our filter feeders to our primary producers and predators, and then you have your apex predators at the top of the food web, such as osprey, which are at the top of the food chain kind of, that will come here seasonally. And a lot of these other animals come here seasonally or will stay year round because of all the natural resources that's available here. Estuaries are also just really beautiful places. Here is our estuary at sunset. And because they're great, beautiful places to be, you can do various kinds of recreation at the estuary. And recreational activities stimulate economic growth along the coast and promote mental and physical health. I know many folks were using our trail, especially during COVID-19, as a way to get out and just enjoy nature, take a break from everything that's going on in the world to just, go out and enjoy the day. So, there's canoeing, bird watching, fishing, boating, all sorts of different kinds of things that are really great, and you can really make a lot of great memories, with your friends and family on the estuary too, which is also just as important. If you're curious about what we've been up to during COVID-19, like I mentioned before, many of our programs have gone virtual. We actually also did a virtual internship in 2020, which was really neat. And we've been doing a lot with our trail as far as getting folks out, promoting our trail and getting folks out there, having volunteers help us with our trail maintenance and trail, keeping tabs on it and making sure that everything's, going smoothly. There's no hazards on the trail like fallen trees or debris or anything like that. So we've tried to engage our volunteers with that. We've installed different kinds of equipment on the trail to capture biodiversity, like soundscape and critter cams, which capture sound and video of animals within the trail. We've also participated in some citizen science opportunities. We had a couple of BioBlitz events where folks go out and they track critters on their phones using different apps. We have coming up another really neat volunteer opportunity to go out and monitor and collect monofilament or fishing line from different containers that are located on Great Bay Boulevard. We're getting this just underway and are looking for volunteers to help us out with that. So if you are interested in becoming a volunteer, you can always go on our website at jcner.com and fill out our volunteer application if it's something that you'd be interested in. Volunteer opportunities, though, have been sort of slim this year again because of COVID, but we're trying to, think of all different ways to get people active still. And continuing to work while we stay safe. Here's during one of our BioBlitz events. That's me on our boardwalk. This is our research team down here, still doing field work. And here's a clip from one of our virtual programs. We had Muddy Critters program for kids. So we were talking about all sorts of different kinds of worms and clams during the summertime. So, all, of our regular programs have gone digital, but still really interesting and fun stuff. So I'll take any questions. If you want to sign up for notifications about our programs or events, you can just email me. That's my email, gannon@marine.rutgers.edu. You can go on YouTube. We have a lot of fun videos to watch on our YouTube, and also we are doing our own virtual programming. So if you want to look at any of our past presenters and speakers, you can watch it on our YouTube channel and follow us on social media at jcner, and also check out our website, jcner.org. Though in about a couple of months, our website will look much different. It's going through a revamp right now, but you can still go ahead and look us up if you'd like. But thanks again for your time. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Caitlin, thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I also wanted to know, to anybody who sees this program, that the library has some Mullica Bay books if they want to check. As you know, this program is going to be seen in YouTube and is going to be presented next week. So hopefully you will get some calls about volunteers to help you guys out.
That's great. Sounds good.
And again, thank you so much.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.